Hornby, and as you can see from my role here is in terms of a research one within the Institute of Education, supporting colleagues' research and helping people produce better research, if you like, improve their research profiles, and hence make a better contribution to education. My own background is as a teacher and an educational psychologist, and then Teachers College lecturer, university lecturer, and I've moved around the world. I presented a Moving Target, worked for 16 years in England, 27 years in New Zealand, and 2 years in Barbados as a consultant on special needs education. And all that has left me with, if you like, a passion for making education more research-based, particularly school education. I believe that educational research can really add to what schools do. I think it probably has underperformed in the past, so hopefully we can do a better job from now on. So I'm going to look at this issue of implementing evidence-based practice in education, which is a part, I believe, of potentially the University Practice School and Research in Residence role. So why is evidence-based practice important? Well, finally, this happens in your career, finally, sort of something comes, you know, after pounding on about things for years, it becomes recognised by the government in the white paper, Educational Excellence. I nearly fell over when I saw the 3 pages on evidence-based practice and fostering a world-leading evidence-informed teaching profession is what it actually says. So it's useful. It also provides links there to the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, the Educational Endowment Foundation, which I find extremely useful. I'll talk about that a bit more later. And it gives some examples, talks about brain gym and how that's a fad and not an example of not good science sort of thing. And then states synthetic phonics as decades of research showing its positive effects. So here we get into the intriguing part of it and the complications of it. This whole issue is not as simple as you would first think. Really, does synthetic phonics have decades of research? No, it doesn't. And we'll see that phonics, have been researching in phonics for years and years. True, synthetic phonics is a newer development. And you know, so the statement there is a little bit dodgy. And I'll go into that later. And then it cites that 2013 report by Ben Goldacre, who is a medical doctor, I understand, and his report is Building Evidence into Education's Key Guidance on Improving Outcomes for Children. So I find it somewhat ironic that a medical practitioner is giving us advice on how we should do education. You know, so does this mean that the medics have got their field so well organised and the integration and use of evidence in medicine is so well organised that he has spare time in his hands to tell us what to do in education? Well, you'll have seen this on the news recently, the issue about cholesterol, saturated fats and a connection to disease, and the use of statin drugs, which, as you may know, some of you, it has been on ITV News, etc., etc. Statin drugs are very widely used to lower cholesterol, in the belief that lowering cholesterol will actually reduce risks of heart attack and stroke and other things like diabetes, etc. So this has been going on for 20 years. It's developed into a $1 trillion industry. Statins, myself, and I went to the medical centre here when I arrived. I've only been here 4 months, and I arrived. My doctor said, well, we'll do a blood check, checked all the blood levels, well, they're all perfectly normal, but you know, at your age, you should be thinking about going on to statins. So I went home and started to look at that. I was thinking, well, yeah, this guy must know what he's talking about. You know, maybe these statins are a good thing. So then I started to go onto Google, as you do, to find out about it. And some more has come on the media recently, but in 2016, in the British Medical Journal, it reported the results, a re-evaluation of the biggest study that was ever done on the connection between saturated fats and cholesterol. And this happened between 68 and 73. And researchers in London and that did a re-evaluation of the results. Huge study, participants aged 20 to 97. It's the largest, most rigorously conducted study there's ever been on this issue, 40-odd years ago. After reanalyzing the data, it was found after 1 year in a diet of vegetable oils, cholesterol levels were lowered by a mean of 14%. Great. However, this low cholesterol did not result in improved health and longevity. Instead, the researchers showed that the lower the cholesterol, the higher the risk of dying. So, wait a minute. We've been told that lowering cholesterol is a good thing. And everybody's going into Marks and Spencer's and looking at that particular section they have of low-fat meals, yes. You're buying your proactive spread, which costs more than you're using margarine instead of butter. You're using milk that's not proper milk, as I say, the Pepsi stuff my wife's maybe drinking for years, the low-fat milk and all that, thinking that if we reduce fats, they're reducing our cholesterol level and we're improving our chance of dying. Well, this is just one. This was a big study, and so maybe it's just one study. Well, actually, no. In 2015, there was a meta-analysis of studies on this topic. The meta-analysis, as you probably know, is where you get lots of studies, good, well-done research, sort of controlled trials, random control trial studies, and you put them together. So this was again done by academic researchers published in the British Medical Journal, and this found no association between high levels of saturated fat in the diet and heart disease. Nor did they find association between saturated fat consumption and other life-threatening diseases. So this whole thing, we've been sold a lie, if you like, or an inaccuracy, or we've not been given the full evidence. It turns out that the authors of the big study, when they got the results, they were so disappointed that it didn't actually show what they thought it showed. They never published it. They suppressed the results. So for 40 or 50 years, people have gone on thinking that there's this connection between saturated fat and lowering cholesterol and improving life chances, and the huge amounts of evidence that that's not the case. So this whole issue of things being evidence-based, obviously, is a lot more complicated than what you think, and you have to be a lot more sophisticated in the way you address it. You can't just go to your doctor and have your doctor tell you to do something and do it because he's a doctor. You have to look at the evidence yourself. And this has implications for us in education, with education research. We need to be more sophisticated than just to be told that, as we were in the white paper, oh, synthetic phonics, that's decades of evidence showing it works. Well, does it? Let's have a look. Let's have a look and show me the evidence. And so I think in terms of schools and teachers, we have to be sophisticated enough to be able to be aware of what is good quality research and actually then take notice of the evidence. So I'm applying this now to education. So terminology then. Well, we've seen a progression over time in the whole research evidence thing, and the demand for more research, more rigorous research evidence, effectiveness of teaching strategy programs, and therefore the terminology has changed. We used to talk about best practice. And best practice, well, we still do talk about best practice. And best practice may mean that something has research evidence, but it may not. Then there's promising practices. There's controversial practices. I did a book on this in the 1990s, the whole issue of evidence-based in education, focusing on special education. And because at that stage you could then see it was starting to be with the internet, you could access a lot more evidence to sort of weigh up. And from then on, of course, things have escalated, and now you can get huge amounts of access. So now the term comes up, research-based. Things are research-based. All these things mean something slightly different. Then there's research-informed, and there's research-led. This was a slide used yesterday at the Vice-Chancellor's Teaching and Learning Conference by the Pro-Vice-Chancellor Learning and Teaching. And I've just shown, I've taken some of the things off to make it clearer, but this just shows, this is what we're trying to do with our undergraduate students in terms of making them, making their education more, making them more aware of research and the benefits of research and be able to use research. So we talk about being research-led. The Vice-Chancellor likes the term that the university is research-led, our teaching is research-led. But we also have research-tutored, research-based and research-orientated. So what are the whole thing, what do these things mean? And they all mean something slightly different, they all have different implications. So what I'm focusing on this talk is evidence-based practice, which is a clearly defined entity now. It has a specific definition, different to the others. And this is, I think, the accepted definition. Practices and programs shown by high-quality research to have meaningful effects on student outcomes. High-quality research means that research has been conducted with control groups, there's been several research studies, maybe a couple of meta-analyses, so they're actually a pretty solid base. To become an evidence-based practice, you have to have high-quality research. And might not be a huge amount of research, but good quality research studies that you can rely upon, published in journals that you can have confidence in, like if something in the British Medical Journal, you can think, well, that's got to be pretty pucker to get in there because the peer review process, and the same in education. So it has to be supported by high quality research. And and then the second part of it is meaningful effects on students, on student outcomes. By meaningful, it means makes a difference to people's lives. So lots of things you can do that have a that are statistically significant, that do have an effect. But because they're statistically significant, doesn't necessarily mean to say that they're going to be significant in the person's lives. So, for example, placebos generally have a small effect, and often, you know, it's like you can improve performance by offering people a placebo, a pill that they think is going to work and it doesn't. There's loads of ways of doing it. It does have a small effect, tends not to be lasting. But we're not talking about small effects, we're talking about meaningful effects. I gave one talk recently on bullying, and most of the research on bullying programs shows that the majority of bullying programs, the best you can expect is that they're 20% effective. Well, 20% sounds pretty good, but when you think of it, in your school, that means for every 5 children that are bullied, 1 is not going to be bullied, but 4 still are. So is that really a meaningful difference? I would suggest it's not. In reading, you don't want 20% of kids being able to read. You want 99% or 95%, or you want, you know, so it has to be, so it's the high quality research and meaningful effects. So this is much more precise than the other terms that are used, like best practice and research. And you'll still see them being used, but for something to be referred to as evidence-based practice, it has to have these 2 features in it. So, extent of the evidence then. Well, so some of the things we use in education have well-established evidence bases. Others have some evidence for their effectiveness. Others are still promising interventions that might, you know, over time, with a bit of research being done on them, it might eventually be an evidence-based practice. Others have extremely limited evidence of effectiveness, or convincing evidence that they're not effective or even harmful. And we've seen the brain gym. It's been around for a long time, and whatever research has been on it has never shown that it's had the impact that is claimed for it. So I would support what's said in the white paper on brain gym. But on synthetic phonics, I mean, not to say that brain gym isn't useful, isn't good, it doesn't have positive effects on children. They might be, you know, socialising children and enjoying the physical aspects, but it doesn't have the effects that it's claimed to have on their cognitive functioning. Synthetic phonics, right, well, that's a different story again. There's evidence, some evidence produced But where is the evidence? You know, what sort of research evidence has been gathered on synthetic phonics? When you look at it, you look at it on Google or whatever, you'll find there has been some studies done on synthetic phonics, but they generally tend to be done by the developers of the synthetic phonics programs themselves, not published in academic or scholarly journals, not published places where they're peer reviewed. They're published in reports and things like that. So that cannot be considered to be an evidence-based practice because there's not quality research being done by independent researchers. So, right, so what about, Plymouth schools then? Let's have a look. Well, when I came here, because I have this particular interest in evidence-based practice, and my latest book is on special needs children, and called it Inclusive Special Education, Evidence-Based Practices for Children with Special Needs and Disabilities. So, right. Okay, so in the book I included 3 types of intervention in education, 2 of which you may not have heard of because they're in the field of special ed. Facilitated communication, used with autistic kids, dumb and delicato, used with brain damaged kids, various times. And then Erlen lenses, colour lenses and overlays. When I put these in the book, the guy who was doing the forward for me, Sydney University, read it. He said, why do you put these 3 in? Everybody knows these things don't work. There's loads of research now that shows that these, you know, I don't see why you're putting those in. They're a complete waste of time. No deal, you know. That was my friend Ray Murray. So, when I did a session with the BEd special needs students when I arrived in March, and they'd just come back from their time in schools. They'd been out of school placements in special schools, special units in schools, mainstream schools. And when I mentioned this, so many of them reported, well, Erlen lenses, these coloured lenses and overlays are being used in Plymouth schools. How can this be? When it's widely, you know, this been widely researched over 20 odd years that these things don't make a difference. And this is where it's, so I said it's not an easy issue. Because of course, when a child does get a coloured overlay and we put it on, it cuts down the glare, which might be helpful to some children, and it also has a placebo effect. So, you know, so then parents go out and they buy the special glasses, £250, whatever they are, with the special coloured lenses. And so these things do get used in schools. It's happening in New Zealand before I left there, still being widely used in schools. So we have to be able to look at it. And of course, when you look on Ellen Hill and the developer's website, you'll see there have been research studies done. But the research studies have not been done by independent researchers using, you know, good quality research designs. And so whatever research there is has been like supporting the continued use of it. So that's where it gets difficult. But so we want to be using evidence-based practice. We want to be using strategies and programs and techniques and interventions that have evidence that they actually make a difference, solid research evidence that they actually work. Well, I'm going to give you some examples shortly. But you need also 2 other factors as well come into play. You can't just focus on the research evidence. Also, you have to look at the current context and practical realities of schools. In particular, the professional wisdom of teachers. Where you've got a teacher that's very well skilled up in a school that's functioning well, and you put an evidence-based practice in there, that's going to work, that's going to make a difference. But if the teacher doesn't have the skills, if the context is not right, the children are not behaving well, then it's not going to have the impact. The other thing is, they need to be culturally appropriate. They have to fit with the culture of the school and the culture of the communities and the parents and the families. So ideally, you want those 3 factors to ensure. So best available research, experiential evidence that you've got professional insight, skill, wisdom, and feasible to implement and culturally appropriate. Then you're going to get things that actually work. So, where do we find these evidence-based practices then? What are our sources? Well, you know, now all you need to go onto Google and you can get all kinds of feedback. Of course, on Google doesn't filter which is as a solid research evidence base and which is a dodgy research base. Things like Google Scholar, ERIC, EBSCO, Web of Science, there you have much more chance of getting the ones with a solid research evidence base. But there are now quite a lot of these things in education. John Hattie, who was Professor of Education at Auckland University in Melbourne, and now he travels the world, he's been in England, you might have heard of him, produced a book called Visual Learning. And he worked for 15 years getting this database together. Everybody wondered what on earth he was doing with it. And then he published it in 2009. And what he does is he's looked at thousands of studies and hundreds of meta-analyses of interventions in the field of education and looked at effect sizes of their impact. So in other words, he measured what the impact was. And he's a statistician by training. So he put these together and he came up with this huge sort of listing of things and all the interventions and what the effect sizes say about how well they work or don't work. So that's hugely useful. You've also got Bob Slavin, who's at Johns Hopkins University in the USA, has produced this Best Evidence Encyclopedia, which is free on the web, and I'll show you the thing in a minute, which again looks at things which are evidence-based practice. In my book, I decided to focus on 8 evidence-based practices which are major strategies which I think are going to be useful for all schools. I'll talk about those a bit. And then the Teaching and Learning Toolkit that's referenced and the links given in the white paper is very useful. And in a way it replicates very much what John Hattie's produced. And it's similar. It's interesting to look at the similarities and a few differences. And then, of course, is the What Works Clearinghouse in the States, which is a government website which, again, looks at only evidence-based practices. And it's the most rigorous source of this. So if you look on that, you can put in the name, you can look for things. Reading Recovery, which is a reading system for early readers, beginning readers, was developed in New Zealand by our best educator, Professor Garry Hornby. He was one of my tutors when I was training as an educational psychologist. And that was our life's work, really. So that's in there as an effective reading program. Actually, it's there as the most effective early reading program. But synthetic phonics is not mentioned. You watch it because it's obviously not a evidence-based practice. So if you want to find that, you just go into, that's the website there, and I've got my thing here, and we'll put this on the website as well, what we've mentioned, so people can have access to it. This is a little snippet from John Hattie's work. It shows 12 different interventions, and this is the effect sizes for these that he got for these 12 interventions. What John Hattie found was that the average intervention in education has an effect size of 0.4. So we consider that anything with 0.4 and above is worthwhile as looking at and still implementing. Anything below 0.4 we should avoid doing. So below 0.4 you see homework is 0.29. And there is a difference in primary and secondary homework that comes out in the toolkit. I'll show you that in a minute. Individualised instruction, that's surprising, isn't it? 0.22. Ability grouping, well, no, there's loads of research over the years that shows ability grouping, is not effective. Anyway, open planning versus traditional classes, no difference. Retention, holding kids back in school for a year, not used much down in England, but it is used in some places, used in the Caribbean, still used in the States. They actually end up worse, -1 point. And of course, shifting schools, we know that. These kids have been to about 8 different schools. We know it's not a good intervention. Whereas cooperative learning is hugely effective. Masses of research show it is. In fact, other things like this show it with a higher effect size, but John Hattie got overall 0.41. Reading recovery, I've already mentioned, the reading scheme Mary Clay invented. Teaching study skills, which we perhaps don't do enough of with kids and with students at university as well, is actually a very powerful intervention. Student-teacher relationships, well, this is reinforcing what we know, isn't it? The most important thing is the rapport that you establish with your students. But one of the Hattie's big things is feedback, formative feedback, feed forward, and he's written papers on it and books on it and things like that. The importance of giving quality feedback to children, to students, is absolutely critical. He also found out that accelerating, moving kids up 1 year in school, it produces good academic results, but we all know there are sometimes social consequences for that, and you'll have seen kids that have educations have been destroyed by doing it. So that's a bit of a controversial one, but this is giving you some sort of idea of which things do make a difference and which things don't. This is Bob Slavin, that's Bob Slavin. This is his best evidence encyclopedia, which he's adding to all the time. It's a free thing. You can just, if you put BEE into Google or best evidence encyclopedia, it comes up. You'll see he focuses on maths, reading, science a little bit, comprehensive school reform and early childhood. So he's putting out into these all the time. So he only puts things in there which are evidence-based practice. And he has a newsletter as well that you can subscribe to, an email newsletter that gets sent to you free with up-to-date reports of recent research in education. So that's a very useful website to look at. And again, when you look on there, you'll find Reading Recovery comes up, even though his own reading program is a what do you call it, a competitor with Reading Recovery. He still has Reading Recovery as one of the most successful reading programs. I say that because Reading Recovery, you may or may not know, has been challenged in New Zealand itself by some of the academics in New Zealand as being ineffective or craziness. I mean, so even the professors of education getting it wrong. You know, you've got to look at the evidence. Only that Tom Cruise movie, you know. He's an agent for some boxers, and the guy keeps saying, "Show me the money, show me the money." I said, "Well, show me the evidence, basically. Show me the evidence." And the evidence, if you go to the evidence, you can't go wrong. I was always, I mentioned the staff, I was diverted a little bit, if I may. The previous book that I did, the controversial issues one, the 1997 one, when I wrote that, I focused on the research evidence for these strategies that either worked or didn't. And I published it, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get sued here, because I was saying facilitated communication is not only ineffective, it's also harmful. And you know, other lenses, you know, ineffective, Dorman Delicado, ineffective and harmful. I thought, oh, I'm going to get sued here. Well, I never did. The reason was because I was only stating the research evidence that was out there for everybody to see in the public domain. So I assume that's why. Maybe nobody ever read the book. It did sell it, so it'll be alright. Okay, so this is my latest book now. These are the ones that the 8 that I focused on in the book. Cooperative learning. I got involved with cooperative learning in my 2 years I was working in Barbados as a consultant on special needs education, and somebody had been to the States and trained in cooperative learning and came back, and we implemented it. Part of my jobs was to provide in-service training at the second to worst secondary school on the island, and it was, you know, it was pretty tough going. And so we did a day of training on cooperative learning, and they went back into schools. Of course, some of the teachers never implemented, never did it, but some of the ones that did made a fantastic difference, even in that setting, which was really, I mean, well, the kids were either down the back of the field smoking pot or having sex, or, you know, whatever, and you know, but the ones that came, implementing the cooperative learning, it changed my view. So I got involved a little bit in cooperative learning, and I now use cooperative learning typically when I'm working with students here as well. I did it with Maureen Hermigintz's class, and it really went down well. So cooperative learning is something that's a huge amount of research showing that it is an effective strategy, but it's underused. Why? Because it's difficult to get into, it's difficult to implement, and there's huge payoffs. So, peer tutoring, well, I think we know that one, where kids help one another. Not only does the kid being helped gain, but the kid doing the helping gains as well. And you have a culture of peer tutoring, it makes a huge difference. So again, these are a load of evidence that they're evidence-based practices. Formative assessment, that's what I mentioned with Hattie. Direct instruction, which is a very prescriptive form, behaviourally based teaching. Loads of evidence that it makes a difference. Metacognitive strategies such as study skills came up under Hattie. Reciprocal teaching, they've heard to teach reading comprehension. Functional behaviour analysis, stacks of evidence. Parent involvement, this comes up again, I think. Yeah, parent involvement in education has been something that I've worked in for years and years, and again, finally I think it's coming out of its Cinderella sort of view, because the evidence shows that it's above average effect sizes when you implement parent involvement strategies. Building relationships, social emotional aspects of learning, incredible years programs. Circle Chimes now have got 2 meta-analyses on it showing that it is an effect, it is a evidence-based practice. So those are the ones that I sort of went with, and I feel that they can be applied across a wide range of schools. This is from the Teaching and Learning Toolkit now. And what I've done is I've picked out some of the things. They have a plus to indicate the size of the impact. And I've picked out some of the things. If you look again, feedback is the highest one. So this is reinforcing what John Hattie said, and yeah, the kind of feedback we give to students is absolutely vital. Homework, interesting, secondary homework was +5. I think primary homework was like +1 or something. So homework in secondary can be effective, in primary, not so much. And these other things, collaborative learning like cooperative learning, metacognition, again, the study skills, that sort of stuff, 1, 2, 3. Setting or streaming -1. So that's reinforcing again what we've had from John Hattie. Again, oral language interventions, outdoor learning, parent involvement, smallish, but they're still above the average. Peer tutoring is big there. Look, phonics. Yeah, phonics is useful, +4. But reading comprehension strategies, that's useful too. So we can't just teach kids to read using phonics. It doesn't make sense, because the evidence shows that teaching reading comprehension strategies is just as important, if not more so. Small group tuition, social emotional learning, repeating a year, -4. So that's confirming what we had before. So this is a really useful source for teachers to look at, say what sort of things, what sort of interventions, what sort of strategies should I be implementing, and which ones should I be avoiding. And this is just a selection, this is not all of it. So that's the question now, how do you implement it? The problem with evidence-based practice, we've known about this stuff now for several years, but it's been disappointing, really, how little of it has actually got into schools, and that's what I'm going to focus on now. So that's 10 years ago. We knew exactly what it was, we knew examples of it. Functional behaviour analysis, direct instruction, we know that. But in the States, surveys done, it's just not getting out there somehow. And the same in Europe. This is Europe, an OECD study. This is this TALIS, Teaching and Learning International Survey. So it found out in many countries education is still far from being a knowledge industry, in the sense that its own practices are not yet being transformed by knowledge about the efficacy of these practices. And this, so it appears, both sides of the Atlantic, Professor Linda Lavelle, one of our professors here, concluded in this is an introduction to a recent journal article on the Journal of Education for Teaching. Urgent need to make active connections between research, policy and practice expertise in order to improve outcomes for all learners. So we're all agreeing it needs to be done, but the frustration that it's not being implemented. I wrote a journal article a couple of years ago in an American journal, and where I looked at this sort of issue, and I came up with some ideas for how to improve the implementation, which I'm going to go through with you. So the next frontier, I reckon, is overcoming the barriers to optimum use of interventions, evidence-based, and supporting enabling factors, so that we can get more of these things into schools. So I've summarised this, it's in that article which I've the reference to, and I can send you the article if you want as well by email, but I've just summarised it here. So what are the barriers? Well, first of all, as was alluded to by Beth earlier, a lot of teachers don't have any confidence in educational research. They don't think it's really going to help. They don't think that's the way they're going to improve their teaching. They think perhaps that by looking at what senior teachers do is far better for them in terms of knowing what to do than looking at educational research, and that may well have been the case in the past, but I challenge now that that is perhaps not the case. There's confusion over the different terms. Oh yes, I'm using research-informed teaching. Yeah, but what does that mean? What does best practice mean? You know, if you're using evidence-based practice, we know exactly what that means. Something that's got bags of evidence based on quality research that makes a substantial difference to kids' lives. Professional development, we're tending to have these one-day workshops, no follow-up. Well, we know what happens. You come away thinking, oh, that's a good idea, but often you don't implement it when you get back to school. Traditional teaching culture in many schools had this, particularly when I was working in Barbados, very traditional ways of teaching, and even when you taught the Teachers College students to do it differently, you send them out into schools, and very soon the existing teachers knock it out of them, and you know, because the traditional way of doing it is, well, that's the way we do it here. We're not going to change any modern ideas here. Contextual variables, which is when you've got setting and ability grouping, and that can make things difficult to implement some of these things, and whether they're culturally appropriate or not. And teachers got to have the knowledge and skills and confidence, like with the cooperative learning. It's actually not that difficult, but you do need to develop a few new skills and ways of working. Once you've got that, it changes the way you teach and you never go back. Okay, so what are the enablers? Well, first of all, professional development needs to be where we're going and doing much more than a one-day workshop, going and demonstrating, and then maybe coaching the people, giving feedback. This is where the University Practice School and the research and evidence could be useful, because staff going in maybe modelling a way to do something. I'd be very happy to come in and take a couple of lessons, say using cooperative learning with the teacher, you know, doing it alongside the teacher, who then you sort of sit in and you actually coach the teacher, you know, for a couple of sessions, and then they're off. They do it, give them feedback on what they've done right, what they've done wrong, because there's certain things, ways, a lot of people use group work, as you know, and they think that, well, yeah, they're doing cooperative learning. Well, unless you're involving individual accountability and positive interdependence, it ain't cooperative learning, and it ain't going to be effective. So basically, it's quite simple to do those things, but you need somebody to show you, having been shown, and then somebody to sit and give you a bit of feedback. Then it might make a difference. It might make a huge difference to your whole teaching career. You might end up using it for the rest of your teaching career. But you've got to be, you know, professional development that actually makes a difference. Communities of practice, a chance to work together in a group with other people. Say if we were implementing cooperative learning in schools, there's 3 or 4 teachers together that are trying it out, and they meet once a week to talk about how they're getting on and the problems and challenges and things like that. That's much more likely to be effective. We've found that's a very important factor for various other research studies that I've done. Support from the head teacher, senior staff and governors for trying out new things, trying out different things is absolutely vital. If your senior people in your organisation don't support you trying out these new things, it's not going to happen. We have so many resources now available on things like YouTube. You put cooperative learning into YouTube, you get examples of people doing it. Peer tutoring, examples of people doing it. So there's loads of resources out there that you can actually look at how it should be done and to copy it. Many of these evidence-based practices now have implementation guidelines. They've got manuals. And some of them are online manuals, some of them are, but there's actually to take you through doing it. And some of them are things on YouTube. Linda Lavell's been involved with this. These mesh guides, I don't know if you've come across this, these are actually free guides on the web, and that's the website, that actually take you through implementing different teaching strategies. They're not, all the teaching strategies are not evidence-based practices. Some of them have got some research evidence for them. So that's where you've got to watch. That they're not evidence, some of them are evidence-based practices, others aren't, but they're really useful guides to help take people through. Right, so let's give an example then of how you would do this in schools or how you implement it. This is mine, and taken from, oh, I don't know why it does this. I've only got so much digital competence. There's an article by Torres, which is in the references. It's given 10, it was in a journal called Teaching Exceptional Children, but it's actually useful, really useful across the board. 10 steps for implementing evidence-based practices. So first of all, you determine what, say, if you're a researcher in residence and you're in the school, and the head teacher comes along to you and says, I've got this problem with this class, and let's take, for example, it's reading comprehension. The kids, the reading comprehension scores are not coming out as well as they could, and the teachers try various things, it's not really going ahead. Okay, so you've identified a problem there that needs addressing. Or it might be poor peer relationships. The kids are not getting on well, there's a bit of bullying and unpleasantness. So looking at, I'm just 2 examples there of identifying what the teacher-student environment characteristics are, what the needs are. And then once you've done that, you then look for what evidence-based practices might actually address those. Well, if it's reading comprehension, well, a really good strategy to use, as you probably know, is reciprocal teaching. Evidence-based practice. Loads of evidence showing it works. It's a little bit difficult to set it up, but it actually works. It does make a difference. In terms of poor peer relationships, well, as you know, Jenny Mosley, circle time. You implement that. It's not difficult for teachers to learn how to do that and to do it well. So you implement those depending on what the problems were. So you're selecting the most appropriate one, like I've just said above, and what's feasible to implement in your particular school. You need to identify key aspects of evidence-based practice. All I said about the cooperative learning. The key aspects: individual accountability, positive interdependence, and make sure that they are part of it. And often people don't get that right. So you have to look for, you can adapt things, but you can't leave out the key things. So ensure that the setting introduced to embodies the base. So basically, it's a good teaching environment to start off with. As I say, the school I worked at in Barbados, that wasn't the case. I mean, cooperative learning made a difference, even in a terrible learning environment where you feared for your life going into the school. You know, but it is obviously far better if you have a classroom that's well organised and teaching that's good to start with. It's going to make it a lot better when you implement evidence-based practices. So again, implemented with fidelity, monitoring the progress, kids' progress with collection analysis, student data, adapting evidence-based practices then to optimise things, making sure you've still got those key components, and then making decisions going forward based on the data you've collected. And then hopefully, when it all works well, be becoming an advocate for that particular evidence-based practice, be it to try more cooperative learning or whatever. So, the research in residence then. So the 10-step process suggests one way in which research in residence can help schools to utilise research. So first, by identifying and clarifying priorities. Second, selecting suitable evidence-based practices. Third, by having a plan to implement them. And fourth, by supporting that implementation by modelling, etc. And monitoring and evaluating process. So this is one example of what research in residence could do, amongst others that Beth and we'll discuss as going through the day. So that's the references. So everything I've referred to is there, and we'll make this available to you. And then Beth, and that's my email address. So if you want to email me and ask me for this thing or any of the articles I've referred to, I'm happy to